Bath, England, autumn 1820. By the time Margaret Hale stepped into the upper assembly rooms, she had already prepared herself for humiliation. Preparation, she had learned, was the only defense society allowed women like her. Not protection. Not fairness. Only endurance. The chandeliers above the marble floor burned with golden brilliance, reflecting across polished surfaces and carefully arranged smiles. Music drifted through the hall, pleasant, refined, completely detached from the quiet brutality beneath it. Bath society prided itself on elegance, on civility, on the illusion that cruelty delivered softly was not cruelty at all. Margaret paused just inside the doorway, allowing her eyes to adjust to the light. Conversation shifted almost immediately. Not loudly. Never loudly. Bath preferred its judgments wrapped in silk. There she is. I thought she stopped attending. Perhaps she hopes someone else will take pity on her. Margaret moved forward anyway. Her gown was dove-gray silk, simple but precisely fitted. Not fashionable enough to compete. Not poor enough to invite open insult. Carefully balanced, like everything else in her life now. Once she had worn brighter colors. Once she had been introduced into rooms like this with expectation instead of caution. Once she had been engaged. The memory came without permission, standing beside Edward Langford, heir to a shipping fortune, as society congratulated them. The smiles. The approval. The sense of safety that had turned out to be conditional. He had ended it publicly. Brutally. Efficiently. Not because she had wronged him. Because she had not needed him enough. She pushed the thought away and continued toward the side of the room, where her aunt already stood speaking to an acquaintance. Margaret, her Aunt Eleanor said quietly when she reached her, you needn't stay long. Margaret offered a small smile. If I leave too quickly, it becomes another story. Her aunt's expression tightened. They both knew she was right. For nearly a year, Margaret Hale had been Bath's favorite cautionary tale, the woman who lost a perfect match because she was too proud, too distant, too intellectual for comfort. The truth was simpler. Edward had not wanted a partner. He had wanted admiration. Margaret had offered honesty instead. The orchestra shifted into a livelier piece. Couples moved toward the dance floor. Laughter rose and fell around them. Then the atmosphere changed. Margaret felt it before she understood it. A tightening, a subtle realignment of attention like iron filings turning toward a magnet. She followed the direction of several gazes. And saw him. Adrian Carlyle, Marquis of Thornfield. He stood near one of the tall windows, half in shadow, as if the room had not quite decided whether to claim him. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in severe black evening coat with minimal ornament, he looked less like a guest and more like an inevitability. His face was striking but severe, sharp cheekbones, dark hair, eyes that were almost black in low light. But it was not his appearance that unsettled people. It was the reputation. Adrian Carlyle did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He ruined people quietly. Political careers ended after private meetings with him. Financial alliances shifted without warning. Families who opposed him found themselves isolated from power within months. No scandal had ever been proven. But no one doubted the pattern. He's here for the political delegation, someone whispered nearby. No, he came early. They say he memorizes weaknesses before negotiations. Margaret studied him without meaning to. He was not socializing. Not charming. Not performing. He watched the room the way a general studied terrain, noting alliances, tensions, vulnerabilities. Dangerous, she thought. Not physically. But in the way storms were dangerous, inevitable once formed. Miss Hale. The voice behind her was smooth, controlled, and unmistakably pleased. Margaret turned. Lady Catherine Rowland stood behind her, radiant in deep sapphire silk, her expression warm enough to be mistaken for kindness by anyone who did not know her well. Unfortunately, Margaret knew her very well. Lady Catherine, Margaret said calmly. I was just thinking, Lady Catherine continued lightly, how unfortunate it would be for such an interesting guest to feel unwelcome. Margaret felt it immediately, the setup. And? Margaret asked. And, Lady Catherine smiled. "I thought perhaps you might sit beside Lord Thornfield at supper." The cruelty was elegant, public, irrefutable. Margaret understood the intention instantly. Send the disgraced woman to the most feared man in the room. Watch him ignore her. Watch her shrink under it. Entertainment. For a moment the old instinct rose, declined politely. Avoid spectacle. Then she straightened. "If Lord Thornfield objects," Margaret said evenly, "he is capable of saying so himself." Lady Catherine's smile sharpened. Of course. The walk toward him felt longer than it should have. Margaret felt eyes following her. Waiting. When she reached him she dipped into a perfect curtsy. "Lord Thornfield. I am Margaret Hale." Adrian Carlyle turned toward her slowly. His gaze landed on her like weight, steady, assessing, completely uninterested in politeness. Silence stretched. Then he spoke. "You were sent," he said. "Not a question." Margaret lifted her chin slightly. "Yes." Pause. "Why come anyway?" "Because refusing would have been part of the same game." Something flickered behind his eyes. Not amusement. Recognition. "Sit," he said. Shock rippled outward through the nearby tables. Margaret sat. Up close she could feel the intensity of him, not aggression but control. The kind built from years of winning conflicts other people didn't even realize were happening. "You're not afraid of me," he said quietly. "I am," she answered. His brow lifted slightly. "I simply don't find fear useful." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Good," he said. "Neither do I." Dinner passed differently than she expected. He did not flirt, did not flatter, did not perform charm. He asked questions. Direct ones. Precise ones. About politics, trade, social reform, women's education, her opinions. And when she answered honestly, he listened like a man collecting valuable information. "You analyze rooms before speaking," he said at one point. "So do you," she replied. "Yes," he said. "But for different reasons." When supper ended, conversation swelled again around them. Margaret expected dismissal. Instead, Adrian stood. "Miss Hale," he said, offering his arm, "walk with me." It was not romantic. It was strategic, intentional, dangerous. She hesitated only a second before placing her hand lightly on his sleeve. Gasps followed them as they crossed the room. Outside on the terrace, the autumn air cut through the warmth of the hall. "Why?" she asked quietly. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Because you didn't try to impress me," he said. "And because you understood the game being played before you reached my table." "And that interests you?" "Yes." Margaret looked out over the gardens, pulse steady but fast. "You should be careful," she said. "I always am." "No," she said softly. "Careful of me." He studied her profile for a long moment. "I am," he said. Silence settled between them, not empty but charged. Finally he spoke again. "May I call on you tomorrow?" Margaret's chest tightened. This was the point where things became dangerous. "Yes," she said anyway. Inside, across the ballroom, Lady Catherine realized her trap had done something far worse than humiliation. It had created interest. And interest from a man like Adrian Carlyle was never harmless. Bath did not believe in coincidence. By the morning after the Assembly Rooms dinner, Margaret Hale's name had begun its journey through drawing rooms, tea tables, and private letters sent under polite seals. It moved faster than fact, carried by tone rather than proof. The Marquis of Thornfield had walked with her, spoken with her, listened to her. In Bath, attention from a man like Adrian Carlyle was not romance. It was risk. Margaret sat in her aunt's morning room, sunlight stretching across folded correspondence she had not yet opened. She already knew what most of it would contain. Invitations quietly withdrawn, social obligations regretfully adjusted, polite distance dressed as concern. Her aunt watched her from across the room. "You could refuse to see him," Aunt Eleanor said quietly. Margaret didn't look up. "And confirm every story they want to tell?" "He is not a safe man to be connected to," her aunt pressed. Margaret folded the top letter carefully. "No powerful man is safe," she said. Only predictable. And he is not predictable. Before her aunt could respond, the sound of carriage wheels rolled slowly past the townhouse windows. Not hurried. Not uncertain. Deliberate. Margaret stood. Outside, a dark carriage bearing the subtle Thornfield crest stopped directly before the house. Not hidden. Not discreet. The footman stepped down. Open the door. Adrian Carlyle stepped onto the pavement like a man who did not consider public opinion a factor worth calculating. Curtains shifted in nearby homes. By the time he reached the door, half the street was aware. Margaret opened it herself. "My lord," she said. "Miss Hale," he replied. His gaze moved briefly over her face, not inspecting beauty but reading stability. As if confirming she had not broken under the pressure he knew must already be building. "May I come in?" he asked. "You know you may," she said. Inside, her aunt rose stiffly from her chair. "Lord Thornfield." "Mrs. Ashcombe," he said respectfully. "Thank you for receiving me." He sat only when invited. Powerful men rarely bothered with small courtesies. The fact that he did was unsettling in its precision, like a weapon sheath but not surrendered. "I won't waste your time," he said after tea was poured. "You have already received letters." "Yes." "They will increase." "Yes." "I intend to make that worse before it improves." Margaret finally looked at him fully. "Why?" she asked. "Because retreat now confirms weakness," he said calmly. "And society feeds on weakness." Her aunt inhaled sharply. "You speak of my niece as if she were a political position," she said. Adrian turned to her, expression respectful but unyielding. "No, ma'am. I speak of society as if it were what it is, a system that destroys what it cannot control." Silence filled the room. Margaret set down her cup. "You could distance yourself," she said quietly. "Let interest fade. It would cost you nothing." Adrian studied her for several long seconds. Then he stood. "Walk with me," he said. Not forceful. Not negotiable. They walked through Bath under full daylight. People saw them. Adrian did not lower his voice. Did not choose quiet streets. Did not pretend coincidence. By the time they reached the Royal Crescent Gardens, conversation around them had already shifted. Is he escorting her? Does he mean to? He wouldn't risk his position for. Adrian stopped walking, turned, and looked directly at a cluster of whispering gentlemen. The men fell silent instantly. He did not speak to them. He did not need to. Margaret felt it then, the true danger of him. Not anger. Not cruelty. Control. Absolute practice control. "You are doing this on purpose," she said quietly as they resumed walking. "Yes." "Why?" "Because they need to understand something," he said. "What?" "That I am not influenced by them." They reached a bench overlooking the lawns. Adrian remained standing. "I have spent 15 years building a reputation for being difficult to manipulate," he said. "That is an understatement," she replied. "Good," he said. "Then listen carefully." His voice lowered slightly, not softer, just more precise. "There are men in London who will attempt to use you against me," he said. "They will suggest you are leverage, weakness, distraction. They will be wrong." Margaret's pulse tightened. "You speak as if I am already part of your world," she said. "You are," he said simply. "Because I chose to stand beside you publicly." The words hit harder than any declaration of romance could have. That night, the first London political paper mentioned her. Not by name, but clearly. A northern marquis shows questionable social attachments. Observers question Thornfield judgment. Margaret read it in silence. Her aunt wept quietly nearby. By afternoon, 3 invitations had been withdrawn. By evening, 2 more arrived, curiosity disguised as sympathy. And the next morning, Bath woke to news that would ripple far beyond drawing rooms. Adrian Carlyle had attended a closed political breakfast in London, and publicly refused an alliance proposal, citing personal priorities. He had never done that before. Never. Margaret understood instantly. He was not just refusing to retreat. He was making her impossible to ignore. When he arrived again 2 days later, tension had turned into open pressure. "You must stop this," Margaret said the moment the door closed. "No," he said calmly. "You are damaging your position. I am redefining it. And if it costs you everything?" He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough she could feel the steadiness of his breathing. "Then it cost me something I chose to risk," he said. Her voice shook. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "You don't perform weakness. You don't trade emotion for advantage. You don't lie when truth is dangerous." Silence. Then he said the words that changed everything. "I trust you." Margaret felt fear rise sharp and immediate. Trust from a man like Adrian Carlyle was not comfort. It was responsibility. Outside, Bath society had already begun preparing its next move. And this time it would not be subtle. London, winter 1820. The first snow of the season fell the morning Margaret Hale's reputation finally collapsed. Not privately. Not politely. Publicly. The letter arrived before breakfast. Thick paper, official seal, unmistakable handwriting. Lady Catherine Rowland. Margaret opened it standing by the window. "You are requested, expected, to attend the winter political supper at Rowland House. Absence will be interpreted." Margaret exhaled slowly. Trap. Not social. Strategic. If she refused, she would be labeled guilty, ashamed, hiding. If she attended, she would be displayed, questioned, dismantled socially in front of London's most powerful families. Her aunt watched her read it. "You cannot go," Aunt Eleanor whispered. Margaret folded the letter carefully. "I have to," she said, "because running now would destroy more than her reputation. It would destroy Adrian." The night London decided her fate. Rowland House blazed with candlelight and wealth. Crystal chandeliers, polished marble, servants moving like silent shadows. Every powerful political name Margaret recognized was present. And when she entered, the room felt it. Conversation dipped. Eyes turned. Judgment sharpened. Margaret walked forward anyway. Lady Catherine stood near the center of the room, radiant and perfectly composed. "Miss Hale," she said warmly, too loudly, "how brave of you to attend." Margaret met her gaze calmly. "I find clarity preferable to speculation." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Lady Catherine smiled. "Then let us be clear," she said smoothly. "Tell me, do you intend to secure your future through Lord Thornfield's influence?" The cruelty landed perfectly. Public. Direct. Impossible to dodge politely. Margaret opened her mouth. "Enough." The voice cut through the room like steel drawn slowly from a sheath. Adrian Carlyle stood at the entrance. Not announced. Not escorted. Just present. The temperature of the room dropped instantly. He walked forward without haste, removing his gloves with deliberate calm, the movement of a man entering negotiation, not conflict. But Margaret knew better. This was conflict. He stopped beside her. Not touching. Standing. "Lady Rowland," he said evenly, "if you wish to question motives, question mine." The silence was absolute. "You imply this woman seeks power through me," he continued. "You are incorrect. I sought her company. I pursued her acquaintance. I stand beside her because I choose to." Shock rippled through the room. Lady Catherine recovered quickly. "My lord, society simply wishes reassurance you are not being influenced." Adrian turned fully toward her. And for the first time, there was something close to visible danger in his eyes. "I have removed ministers from office," he said quietly. "I have collapsed trade agreements. I have ended 3 political coalitions. You believe I can be manipulated by kindness?" No one moved. No one breathed. Then he did something no one expected. He reached for Margaret's hand. And held it. Publicly. "I intend to marry Margaret Hale," he said. The room shattered into sound. Gasp. Whispers. A glass breaking somewhere. Margaret's heart slammed painfully. "Adrian," she whispered, panic rising. "You can't." "I can," he said quietly without looking away from the room. "And I am." The price of that choice. Within 24 hours. 2 political alliances withdrew support. 1 investment group paused negotiations. 3 London families formally distanced themselves. And Adrian Carlyle did not retract a single word. Instead, he brought her to London openly, walked beside her openly, sat beside her at dinners openly. He was not protecting her quietly. He was making her untouchable publicly. The offer that should have ended it, it came from his family. A private meeting. Money. Land. Security. If Margaret would leave England quietly, the sum would have supported her entire extended family for generations. Margaret listened to the offer in silence. Then she said calmly, "No. Think carefully," Adrian's uncle warned. "I have," she said. "If I leave, it will be because I choose my future, not because you purchase my absence." When they left the meeting, Adrian stopped her outside the carriage. "You understand," he said quietly, "that refusing them binds you to this outcome." Margaret met his gaze steadily. "No," she said. "It means I am choosing it. The choice that made them equal." 3 weeks later, standing in the gardens of Thornfield Manor, winter wind sharp against her cheeks, Margaret turned to him. "I will marry you," she said. Adrian went still. "Not because you defended me," she continued. "Not because society turned cruel. Because you never once treated me like something fragile." His voice was low. "And if I fail you?" "You won't," she said. "Because you don't pretend to be gentle. You choose to be fair." For the first time, the hard line of his control broke slightly. Not weakness. Relief. The ending London never expected. They married quietly. No spectacle. No political display. No society approval. Just choice. And London learned something it had never liked learning. Power did not always follow reputation. Sometimes, it followed truth.